Coming up in our newscast tonight. On Friday, the two Koreas' joint liaison office will be open. The contact facility will play a key role in helping Seoul-Pyongyang ties by enabling them to maintain contact around the clock. Meeting with people with developmental disabilities and their families, President Moon Jae-in vowed to provide greater support. New measures include establishing special daycare centers, opening more schools, and offering more classes for students with disabilities. Unemployment figures reached the highest for the month of August in this century, prompting the government to spend all its jobs budgets for the year before this month is up. NEWSCENTER begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Che. Come Friday, at the Kaesong Industrial Complex north of the border, Seoul and Pyongyang's joint liaison office will officially be open. Woo Jung-hee starts things off with a welcome followed through on a part of the Panmunjom Declaration signed by the leaders of the two Koreas.
A contact office that enables communication between the two Koreas 24/7 all year round. For the first time in history, South and North Korea will be running a joint liaison office together, and it'll be within the Kaesong Industrial Complex, a factory park the two Koreas ran together until February 2016. The grand opening will take place on Friday with 50 to 60 attendees from each side of the border. South Korea's Unification Minister Cho Myung-kyun and his North Korean counterpart Lee Sun-kwon, who heads the North's Reunification Committee, will be signing and exchanging an agreement on running the contact office.
The office will be in charge of overseeing constant contact between the two Koreas, discussions for inter-Korean talks, and providing support for civilian exchanges. Officials from the Land, Forest, and Culture ministries will also be staying.
Vice ministerial level officials from the two Koreas will be heading the office. South Korea will be appointing the Vice Unification Minister Chun Hae-sung as its head, and North Korea plans to appoint its vice head of the Reunification Committee as Chun's counterpart. They'll serve as representatives whenever meetings take place. 15 to 20 officials each from Seoul and Pyongyang will be at the contact office.
The joint liaison office will become an ordinary communication channel for improving inter-Korean relations, lowering military tensions and bringing peace to the Korean peninsula. We expect it will contribute to keeping inter-Korean relations stable and helping North Korea-US nuclear negotiations.
The Joint Liaison Office can serve as the foundation for sustainable and institutionalized inter-Korean relations. Seoul says the two Koreas aim to ultimately set up resident representative offices in each other's capitals. Woo Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Staying here in the nation, the government has submitted to Parliament a bill to ratify April's Inter-Korean Summit agreement. Already there's a point of major contention, the cost of implementing that deal. Shin Se-min has the latest from the National Assembly.
Once next week's summit is over, rival political parties have agreed that they will consider a bill that would ratify the Panmunjom Declaration. Regardless, the Unification Ministry had submitted the bill hoping to secure bipartisan support for the denuclearization drive before the summit. But that's now highly unlikely, with the parties divided over the price tag. The government estimates the cost of implementing the declaration through next year would be a total of $417.8 million, an addition of nearly $265 million to the roughly $152 million already earmarked for next year's Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund. And that money would cover the estimated outlays for joint projects in railways, roads, and forestry, as well as other modernization initiatives. President Moon Jae-in, before the bill was submitted, had urged lawmakers to put aside party interests and partisan politics and give their support at this important juncture. Conservative opposition parties, however, are up in arms about the cost figures. The main opposition Liberty Korea Party and the minor opposition Bareunmirae Party say the bill is deceiving the Korean people and that a unilateral demand for ratification is an affront to the National Assembly. The ruling party, however, is standing by the government-led initiative, calling it the duty of the parliament to review and affirm the government's plans. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The two Koreas should hold talks between representatives of their parliaments. That's a proposal Seoul's National Assembly Speaker Moon Hee-sang will make in a letter to Choi Tae-bok, the chairman of the North's Supreme People's Assembly. The South Korean delegation attending the summit next week has agreed to deliver the letter on his behalf. Top local lawmakers in parliament were invited by the president to accompany him to that summit, but none of them could take up on that offer. The decision that seemed inevitable given the circumstances of each party. Turning the spotlight to the new U.S. ambassador to South Korea now. It's been a rather quiet couple of months since Harris took on the role. That changed yesterday when he delivered a wide-ranging speech on the Seoul-Washington alliance and building bridges with Pyongyang. Lee Ji-won shares with us the Admiral's remarks.
Hope is a weapon in diplomacy. U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Harris shared a statement he found profound to the audience at the 48th Forest Forum in Seoul. The former U.S. Pacific Command commander said on Tuesday that Seoul and Washington are in the very early days of their experiment in the denuclearization of North Korea, and while it may or may not turn out well, it's okay to be hopeful and optimistic.
I think we have a great opportunity ahead of us because of the work of both of our presidents. We are in an unimaginable place. I could not imagine what I saw in Singapore or what I saw in Panmunjom even a year ago when I was the Pacific Command commander. That to me was unimaginable, and yet here we are today.
Harris backed up his statements by saying how much confidence President Trump has that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will keep his promise to dismantle the regime's nuclear program, as sealed by their handshake at the June 12 summit in Singapore. North Korea's human rights violations were also raised, with the ambassador saying the U.S. remains deeply concerned. Harris assured that the U.S. will remain sensitive to the issue and continue working with the international community to solve it, like exposing the issue to people around the world. Asked about the possibility of reducing the U.S. troop presence in the South, Harris said despite numerous reports, such a move is not being contemplated. He went on to credit American troops in the South, the South Korean military, and their joint forces for having played a significant role in bringing the two allies back to the table with the North. Harris said such an ironclad alliance is what built mutual security and co-economic prosperity for both sides, and that maintaining those strong ties is one of his top priorities as the U.S. ambassador to South Korea. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
The war that divided Korea has not officially ended. It's been put on hold with an armistice agreement. Today, there are efforts to try and get over that last hurdle. The most prominent step include what was discussed during the historic meeting between the current leaders of Seoul and Pyongyang. According to our Choi Si-young, hopes are high the upcoming summit could produce a peace declaration.
Will the third Inter-Korean Summit provide the momentum to formally end the 7-decade-long Korean War? At the first summit in April, Seoul and Pyongyang agreed to declare it over this year. But Pyongyang and Washington can't seem to agree on what has to be done first for that to happen. Pyongyang demands that they end the war right away, but Washington insists that North Korea hand over a list of all its nuclear-related materials first. South Korea's special envoys who visited North Korea last week suggested working simultaneously toward the end-of-war declaration and the nuclear list. Kim Jong-un is known to have said he's willing to work more proactively if the two can go simultaneously, but laid out no new measures for denuclearizing. Kim also said declaring an end to the Korean War would neither weaken the South Korea-US alliance nor require the withdrawal of American troops from South Korea.
At the moment, what Kim Jong-un has described is a trust-building gesture to assure the U.S. that the declaration won't have a negative impact on the South Korea-U.S. alliance.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in said the declaration would only be a political affirmation that hostilities between the two Koreas are over.
The peace declaration could bring about North Korea's denuclearization, a new phase in inter-Korean relations, and a more peaceful Korean peninsula.
The key would be whether the two Koreas can find the middle ground in their nuclear negotiations at the summit next week. That result will be shared by Presidents Moon and Trump at their summit to be held on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, which could kickstart the three countries' move towards ending the Korean War later this year. Choi Xiong, Arirang News.
At their maiden meeting, President Moon Jae-in and his North Korean counterpart agreed to implement economic programs designed to promote balanced growth. So how far have we come since then? Our Kim Hye-sung zooms in on the potential projects and the preconditions required to make them happen.
Peace, denuclearization, and economic cooperation. Inter-Korean economic exchanges, reconnecting inter-Korean railways and roads in particular, were some of the key agreements signed in the Panmunjom Declaration at the first summit between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un last April.
Reconnecting rail and roads will enable free movement of people and resources, laying down the first step for other possible economic engagements. North Korea would be able to get help modernizing its outdated social infrastructure and facilities. For the South, it would bring a new momentum for growth.
If reconnected, South Korean exports would be able to reach China, Russia, and even Europe through the Trans-China Railway and the Trans-Siberian Railway, cutting transport time to Europe by a third compared to sea routes. Already in July, South Korean officials jointly inspected the railway sections on the North Korean side. Other possible projects include tourism at Mount Kumgang, reforestation, and the reopening of the Kaesong Industrial Complex, which was shut down following heightened tensions between the two Koreas. Data by the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy shows such engagement could result in an economic boost worth $150 billion over the next 3 decades. But all these projects can happen only after UN sanctions on the North are lifted.
North Korea would have to show it is taking meaningful, actual steps to denuclearize before the lifting of UN sanctions, which would then allow legal investment in the North. South Korea also needs to work closely with the U.S. so that economic engagement doesn't come before denuclearization.
Cautiously, preparations are underway. The Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund has been increased by 14% on year for 2019, and South Korean companies like Hyundai Asan have created special task forces to review investment projects in the North. All eyes are on the third Moon-Kim summit next week and what agreements the two leaders can reach. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
The Moon Jae-in administration introduced a state program to provide greater support to those with developmental disabilities. People with such conditions, as well as their families, along with lawmakers, government officials, and various experts, were invited to the nation's top office today for that announcement. Hwang Ho-jun files us this report from 청와대.
발달 장애인들은 다른 장애인들보다 살아가기가 훨씬 힘이 듭니다. 우리 부모님들도 발달 장애 아이들을 키우기가 참으로 힘듭니다.
The South Korean president's remarks came during a meeting at the Blue House Monday morning where he unveiled the government's comprehensive plan to support people with a range of developmental disabilities. It was attended by about 160 people, including people living with such conditions and their families. President Moon acknowledged the pain of parents, noting that to get the government to address the issue, they've begged on their knees, shaved their heads, and gone on long, long marches. President Moon said it's about time the nation helps with their burden.
부모님들은 내가 하루라도 더 살아서 아이들보다 끝까지 아이들을 돌볼 수 있었으면 좋겠다라는 것이 가장 큰 소원이라고 합니다. 그런 아픈 마음에 대해서 우리 사회가 얼마나 이제 따뜻하게 이렇게 마음을 보여주는지 그런 이제 반성이 듭니다.
The new measures were announced by South Korea's Minister of Health and Welfare, according to whom the government plans to give those with developmental disabilities lifelong care. For example, by the year 2022, the government will establish 60 new daycare centers for children with physical and mental disabilities and increase the number of special education schools to 197 from the current 174, adding more than 1,200 special classes. The government will seek to expand employment for those with severe disabilities and establish an income security system for them as well. Informational and educational support for parents will also be provided. Supporting people with disabilities and their parents is part of the Moon administration's initiative to build what it calls an inclusive nation. Though he noted the new plan won't fix everything, President Moon pledged to continue expanding and developing support measures like this as long as he's in office. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Seoul's government has been continually increasing the budget for jobs growth. However, latest figures show little improvements in the grim situation. Our Ko-Rini sheds light on the factors contributing to the disappointing digits.
More doom and gloom for job seekers in South Korea, as the government's latest figures paint a bleak picture for their prospects. According to Statistics Korea Wednesday, the number of unemployed people in August hit 1.13 million. That's the highest figure for the month of August since 1999, when South Korea was still struggling to recover from the 1997 Asian financial crisis. And around 26.9 million people were employed last month. That's up a mere 3,000 on-year. It's the first time since 2010 that the on-year figures for newly added jobs have been that low. Statistics Korea says there's a big fall in employment in the business facilities management and manufacturing sectors.
The number of newly added jobs in August compared to the same period last month increased in the health and social activities, information and communication industries. However, it decreased in sectors such as wholesale and retail, business facilities management and manufacturing.
It's been suspected that the country's chronic issues of low birth rates and a rapidly aging society have played a part in the figures. But the statistics agency says it's not the only reason that could explain the shrinking labor force. A slowdown in South Korea's manufacturing sector, particularly its traditionally strong shipbuilding and auto sectors, which have been undergoing restructuring, was cited as the main reason for the faltering job figures for August.
In the manufacturing industry, changes in working hours such as the new 52-hour maximum workweek system might have affected the job figures, along with the restructuring issue. Small and medium-sized businesses in this field might have been hit by the sharp increases in the minimum wage for this year and next year.
The overall unemployment rate for August stood at 4%, up 0.4 percentage points on year. The outlook for young job seekers is even more gloomy. The jobless rate for Koreans between 15 and 29 years old was 10% last month, also the highest since 1999. Meanwhile, the government aims to use all of its jobs budget for this year by the end of next month. Around $17 billion has been allocated to tackle the unemployment issue. Ko-Rini, Arirang News.
The nation's finance chief presided over an economic ministers meeting today. Focus was, of course, on job creation. Kim Dong-yeon stressed the government will push to execute a $38 billion supplementary budget before the year is up. The minister also pointed out the government will discuss ways to adjust the pace of the minimum wage hikes, which has been cited in business circles as the key reason that employers have been reluctant to hire more people. The Moon administration raised next year's minimum wage by 10.9% to around $7.50. This follows a drastic 16.4% hike in 2017. After a Korean man who returned from Kuwait contracted the Middle East respiratory syndrome, health authorities found none of the people who came in close contact with him have the virus. Still, they're monitoring them around the clock. Yoon Jung-min gets us up to speed with the developments.
As of Wednesday, all 10 people who came in contact with the MERS patient and showed symptoms have been confirmed free of the virus. They were discharged from hospital but remain on the quarantine agency's watch list. Another person who arrived in Korea on Tuesday on a flight from Dubai showed similar symptoms and was quarantined, but in the first of 2 tests, she came out negative. As for the dozens of people who came in contact with the first patient but have not shown any symptoms, the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has quarantined most of them at their homes. They include other passengers, flight attendants, and medical workers. But there are around 10 foreign nationals that the government is still looking for. The health authorities have been criticized, however, for carrying the original patient to hospital in an ordinary ambulance and not one that was hermetically sealed. The virus spreads easily through the air, so equipment is needed to keep contaminated air from circulating. The health authority had said earlier that they did use a special ambulance, but that was later found to be false. With one of Korea's biggest national holidays coming up, Chuseok, millions will be moving around the country. So the Seoul metropolitan government has also launched a task force to contain the virus. Korea was hit hard by an outbreak of MERS in 2015, which infected more than 180 people nationwide and caused 38 deaths. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Over in Vladivostok, where the Eastern Economic Forum is being held, the Seoul's Prime Minister sat down with the leader of the host nation on the sidelines of that event. Among other things, the duo touched on bilateral economic cooperation to boost trade volume between the 2 countries. Cha Sang-mi has the highlights from their meeting.
South Korean Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun sat down with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday on the sidelines of the 4th Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, Russia. Prime Minister Lee thanked President Putin for Russia's support towards establishing permanent peace and denuclearization on the Korean peninsula, and said that the South Korean government was doing its best to implement what was agreed in June between President Moon Jae-in and Putin, including the 9 bridges of cooperation between South Korea and Russia. The 9 bridges include cooperation in shipbuilding, Arctic shipping, seaports, energy and natural gas, as well as railways, jobs, agriculture, and fishing. President Putin also stressed the importance of bilateral economic and trade cooperation between Moscow and Seoul, citing the 27% increase in trade volume between the 2 countries last year and the 8% increase in the first half of this year. The Russian leader said South Korea is a very important and promising partner for Russia in the Asia-Pacific region and that he is satisfied by the developments made between the 2 countries. The South Korean PM also said that President Moon proposed to try to increase the bilateral trade volume by 50% by 2020, which marks the 30th year anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the 2 countries. He also proposed doubling the current amount of people-to-people exchanges between Moscow and Seoul. Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun further delivered President Moon's words to invite President Putin to South Korea in the near future. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
The 7th Seoul Defense Dialogue begins at the Westin Chosun in the nation's capital. Some 600 defense officials and experts from 52 countries and 3 international organizations registered for the annual forum. The opening ceremony will be held Thursday morning with speeches by the Director of National Security Chung Yu-yong and Defense Chief Song Young-moo. For 3 days, a series of bilateral and multilateral talks between vice ministerial level officials will be held. They'll cover a wide range of issues, including the denuclearization of the peninsula, defense cooperation for international peacekeeping activities, as well as maritime security cooperation. A major defense exhibition to showcase domestic weapons to international buyers is now on in Goyang. With hundreds of local firms taking part, this year's event is expected to be the largest arms fair to date here in the nation. Kan Young-woo fills us in on what to expect from Defense Expo Korea 2018.
South Korea's biggest arms exhibition kicked off Wednesday at the Korean International Exhibition Center in the northwestern city of Goyang. Hosted by the Association of the Republic of Korea Army and supported by Seoul's Defense Ministry, the Defense Expo Korea 2018 promotes overseas sales of Korean-made weapons and military technology. For 5 days this week, 250 defense companies from 31 countries have a chance to talk with potential buyers and attract them with the latest cutting-edge weapons, helicopters, and military vehicles. One of the highlights of this year's event is the Korean Army's special booth set up to display its 5 game changers, including the Warrior platform that gives soldiers high-tech battle gear, such as advanced bulletproof clothing and advanced rifle attachments. The newest additions to this year's exhibition include 8-wheeled armored vehicles designed to enhance troop mobility and survivability, and obstacle-breaching tanks that can clear pathways through minefields. The previous defense exhibition in 2016 drew over 120,000 visitors and had some 400 business consultations worth over $1.5 billion. After providing networking opportunities for defense firms and buyers until Friday, the exhibition will be open to public on Saturday and Sunday. 간영우, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle Buck at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, the pleasant weather continues in Seoul, but we can't say the same for certain other regions.
Yes, Daniel. Now, the southern regions and Jeju have been receiving some showers this afternoon. The rain is expected to continue until tomorrow as well, while the pleasant conditions will continue elsewhere in the nation. Tomorrow's rain isn't going to be a heavy one, though. Jeju will receive between 10 and 50 millimeters of precipitation, while the rest of the southern regions will receive 5 to 20 millimeters of rain, or even less further you go up north. There's more rain in store for this week, so remember to check the latest weather updates before heading outside. Friday, the whole country will become gloomy, and rain is actually expected to fall again over in Chungcheong provinces and expand nationwide eventually. Going over to our temperature readings for tomorrow, so we'll start the morning at 19 degrees Celsius, while Gwangju, Busan, and Jeju makes it into the 20s. There is still a little bit of summer still left in the nation, with Seoul peaking up to 29 degrees. Daegu and Gyeongju tops 25 and 23 degrees respectively. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's it from us at this hour. As always, thank you for watching.